Hopefully y'all are having a good snowy morning. My name's Sarah Owen, and I'm the director of the library at Independence Community College. And Sharon, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Sharon Kibbe. I'm the Dean of Instruction at Highland Community College. Thanks so much for logging on this snowy day, especially if you may be home with all the challenges that presents with Zoom as well. We thank you for joining us.
Our emails are on this. We'll be linking the presentation, the slides after the session in the Schedule. So you can go back and get those. Feel free to email us whenever. I'm going to start by saying that both of us are obviously at a college level. So we're not in the midst of the K-12 OER world, but we have been working quite hard the last few years at the college level. So we wanted to start reaching out and making the connections in the K-12 education world. See what questions you had about what our process was, see if we can help with anything, and try and build a bridge for the state education world to see what's out there and what we can do in education. So I'm going to go through a few slides at first. Whoops. What is OER? Just kind of in case you're new to this, OER is open educational resources. They're either in the public domain or licensed in a manner that allows you to take those for free and remix them, reuse them, revise, edit, and share those either with your class or your colleagues. And so there are several, if you're not familiar with them, Creative Commons licenses that dictate what you can do within those 5 R's. And there's a link there. I'm not going to go into great detail because I know there's a session on Creative Commons license, but just to kind of give you a background of what is out there and what things might mean if you see them in OER. So next is why OER? Well, in the K-12 or in the higher ed world, a lot of it deals with student cost saving for students purchasing textbooks. And that trickles down to K-12 because we know there's like a shrinking pot of money for education everywhere. So there is cost saving. You know, if you're not purchasing the textbooks from a company or instructor materials from a company, there's cost saving there. And we all know that even the things that we purchase or we use in a classroom aren't always perfect. So we have to be creative anyway. So this allows you to collaborate and mix and match different materials with partners and with different resources that you can find. Quality improvements. We're continuously updating and trying to improve that in a timely manner. And I think, you know, the last couple of years have shoved everyone right into the online world very quickly. And so it's a very responsive education environment. And because a lot of OERs are housed online, it can make things easier, but it also can be a barrier if you're relying on technology. But it can make it easier if everyone can still access textbooks and teaching materials online if they're not in a face-to-face class. So and we can contextualize it to what the students are experiencing and learning at that time. It also allows for community engagement because there's a lot of collaboration between creators, between instructors who might be working on similar projects. Towards the end, I'm going to take you and show you a couple of database sort of programs, online locations where you can search and find K-12 material that's already there and it's already been created that you're able to use. And then there's also independent learning because a lot of the materials are self-paced or can be created to meet individual student needs on that. Do you want to, I think this is where you were going to start. Do you want me to stop sharing, Sharon, or just move the slide?
Go ahead and leave it up, and then I'll just continue to move on so we don't need to give everybody Zoom fatigue. Again, as Sarah mentioned, our experience is in higher ed, obviously, and the higher ed focus for OER, and you'll see if you have attended some of the other sessions about open educational resources, it gives us more flexibility with students and definitely reduces cost. And there's some movements across the US. In fact, California, I believe, just passed through legislation a funding model for OER in higher ed in California. So we're starting to see that move through process because it is so much cheaper and accessible in many cases for students to be able to use online resources. So the information that we'll present here for some of these items for K-12 is information that we've gleaned from meetings we've had with superintendents, faculty, staff at those K-12 levels, obviously many of them secondary ed because that's who we're interacting with the most. So if there's something that I say that kind of chimes for you and you want to make a note, just indicate, raise your hand, send a chat. Sarah and I will answer that as we go along. But again, we're looking for input from you as well, because we know in higher ed, as we have moved into this OER journey, our hope is that we're able to help K-12 do that as well, and maybe help you bypass some of the obstacles that we've already experienced. So we want to be that resource for you in partnership. So when we look at curriculum at K-12, we already know that many districts have moved away from hard copy textbooks. Students have, in many places, have one-to-one devices, either iPads, some other sort of tablet, a laptop that they may be using. We see most of that shift in middle and high school, though in some of the larger districts around the state, I know they do push those down to younger levels for accessibility. So it's no longer what I remember. And my kids are of the age that for a while they were still bringing home hard copy textbooks, and now everything is digital when they're bringing that home. But we also know that there's significant scrutiny on the curriculum that's selected. There's some things bouncing around out there in the state about how you present the curriculum you're planning to teach, how people can review that. So OER has overcome the stigma over time of just being a book out there on the internet that someone's written. It is now, if you look at those resources that Sarah's going to show you, you're going to see that the information is written by content experts in the field area that do have, many of them have advanced work in their background with pedagogy for children, andragogy for adults, content area. So it's no longer just something I found on the internet. It's a solid resource that you can access that hopefully reduces costs and increases access. Sarah, can you go to the next one? Great. So barriers to going fully digital. Highland Community College is in Northeast Kansas, so we're in a rural area. Most of my higher ed life has been spent in rural areas, so I'm very sensitive to the discussion of barriers to going digital for some people. And we know, because we all went through COVID, right? Those barriers that we sort of thought were out there, but we didn't think were that big of a deal, immediately became an issue for our students because they didn't maybe have internet access at home. There wasn't a reliable provider. We didn't have enough bandwidth. So we want to help you start identifying those barriers. That's part of this OER process and working through those. One of them is age appropriate and quality resources. When Sarah takes you out to look at the things that are available for OER, you will see that there are some that are specifically directed toward lower age levels. Middle school, high school, primarily, not so much in elementary school. But the great thing about OER is that if you want it, you can write it. You can collaborate with individuals in your field and develop that item. So finding that age appropriateness and quality resources. And in the higher ed world, sometimes we get hung up on credentials, right? All those letters behind your name. And it used to be that textbooks were viewed as more valuable. So the more letters a person had behind their name, the more that book was reliable. And if you didn't have a lot of letters or credentials behind your name, oh, maybe the information wasn't quite as reliable. But we found that with OER, that those resources that are out there, and of course you need to vet them for appropriateness in your designated curriculum, but there is high quality, and it gives you the flexibility of adjusting it to your classroom and your student population in any given year. The other issue, reliable internet access. I mentioned I live in a small town in Northeast Kansas, and there was times during our Zoom education when the wind blew kind of hard and we lost all internet access. It kind of disappeared for our students. So that is a barrier for you, especially those of you in rural areas. Making sure that not only you're developing the protocols for that, but also implementing them. It's one thing to say, well, if internet access goes out, our kids will just have downloaded the book, the resource they need. Well, the step in between is, do they know how to download the book? Do they have the one-to-one device access? You'll see listed there that has the memory to be able to download stuff and not just work from the cloud. There is a fairly large push in legislatures at both state and federal level to get reliable internet access out to rural areas. Takes time, of course, takes money. So that will continue to be a barrier for quite a while, I imagine. One-to-one device access, I just mentioned. It seems like most institutions have some sort of one-to-one device access now for their students. But again, that really goes hand in hand with reliable internet access. And I know in our individual school district that we have, where my kids go, we have been using iPads, and we're going to make a transition to, I think they're using Chromebooks. So, you know, you work in Google Classroom, it should all be the same, but we all know that Apple and non-Apple things don't always work quite the same. So there's some barrier with there. Cost of printing if online access is not available. So those textbooks that you'll see, some of those examples that Sarah will show you, or that maybe some of you will write yourselves in the future. If you need to print those off, if the one-to-one devices are not available, if you're working with students where a digital format is not appropriate for them for a variety of reasons, the cost of paper and ink for printing those off can be pretty significant. So that's one thing your institution would have to look at, is what's the difference between that hard copy textbook and printing of the item if you need that. One of the best benefits I think that we have seen for OER and digital resources in our institution, as we're starting to use more digital resources, is the accessibility of those for students that need screen readers, the ability to look up the information, keeping the information current, because we know that textbook editions change frequently. And so keeping the information current within that resource is important. And frankly, students are just, giving them a hard copy textbook is almost an anomaly for them anymore, especially in higher ed, but I'm sure with our K-12 partners as well. They are used to having that digital resource and interacting quickly. So doing lookup and looking for a word instead of having to flip through the pages to find what they're looking for. I believe part of the discussion that we're seeing around the state, there is some talk about some funding maybe hanging out there for printing of those resources. But again, smaller districts, that may be more of a challenge than for larger districts. Constituent support can be a barrier. In the higher ed world, we have been working for the last year, a little over a year, offering specific trainings that higher ed partners can join into and listen about how to use OER, working with faculty and staff and administration about the benefits of OER, because you always have to do the education before you get the support. And we know that in the K-12 world, sometimes support can be difficult to come by. Sometimes you have a lot of great support, but trying to get everybody on the same page is really important. And that's one of the models we can share with you from higher ed, are those things that we have done to get those constituents on board, to help them see the benefits, but also be honest and talk through the challenges and realize that nothing works perfect the first time. And it takes a little bit to work through those barriers. And then obviously integration with current systems. The OER options that Sarah will show you are web-based. So you go to a website, find the book, but integrating them with whatever you may be using. I believe most of the K-12 in the state are using Google Classroom. In higher ed, some of us use Google, some use OneDrive. We all have varying options. So just making sure that it integrates. So it's important to start those steps early and have the ear, we hope, of those of us that have been there, that we can start walking you through some of those challenges. Sarah, if you'll click next. All right, here's some resources for you. And Sarah will hit some of those as we go. Does anybody have any questions at the moment about this?
That's what I was going to ask. If and I'm going to go out to these web. Oh, somebody has a hand up. Jay Franklin.
Can you hear me now, Sarah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm one of those people who's a little bit technologically challenged. I knew the weather was going to be bad, so I brought my laptop home, and I've been trying to set it up so that I can go ahead and participate. This is a topic that is of incredible interest to me because my field is English education. So I spend as much time in the field with my interns and my student teachers as I do on campus here at Pittsburgh State University. Mm-hmm. And one of my greatest desires is that the OER movement will become a two-way stream, a two-way street, that it won't just trickle down from higher education, but that it will also percolate up from K through 12 so that students and parents who are coming in for their freshman year, whether it's community college 4-year, with the expectations that OER will be an option, that it won't be the only option, but that it will be an option. And depending on what kind of course it is, for example, in my Gen Lit course, I don't see why I should have to have an anthology anymore. I think that the literature that I teach is easily accessible online. And I think that I can compose the critical apparatus, the literary essays that they used to have to pay for as part of the Norton Anthology or the Bedford Companion. The question that I have is that there's one really great divide between K through 12 and college that I haven't heard addressed yet. That's the role of parents. So that, for example, I don't expect parents to have very much, once that person's in my class, I can't tell a grade. I mean, it's against the law for me to tell a parent one of my students' grades, right? So that there's a right to privacy, et cetera. So I guess the question that I have is that, and it popped up because you've got your resources right here, and you've got and I think it was one of Sarah's screens maybe, talked about the varied constituencies. And so, constituencies, to me, parents are definitely one of those constituencies. When I regard those constituencies, I think that one of the things that I do is that I prioritize according to value. So with OER, the first value is cost, right? It's free. And so that saves district. Okay, and Sharon makes a really great point about printing versus hard text. And of course, the value of printing versus hard text is the flexibility. You can always print newer resources. Once you've got an old textbook, I mean, we all know stories about textbooks that are 5 to 12 years old. It's the second value with which I'm concerned right now, because I'm wondering if that might be a moral value, a political value, a cultural value in some ways. Have you bumped into anything? Because at the college level, I would call it parental interference. They might call it guidance or collaboration or participation. Have you seen any kind of move towards a new kind of collaboration where parents move from a supportive parental role to a more collaborative, instructive role when it comes to OER, given that parents can now research sources as much as teachers can research sources of information for their courses? I'm sorry, that was a convoluted question, but it speaks to one of the basic differences between K through 12 and higher education, I do believe, and that's the role of the parent.
Sure. And what I can answer, I'll answer from my personal experience from a parent, but I would love to hear from some of our K-12 partners. In our household, I've been in higher ed for many years. And thank you for being from Pitt State. I would just like to say I am a gorilla, and so is my oldest son. So we support ESG.
Once a gorilla, Always a grill.
Anyway, so when we started talking about OER and looking at even just digital textbooks in general in our home, I've been in education for a long time. My husband is a very gifted engineer, smart guy, uses technology all the time. Trying to get him on board with the benefits of just digital textbooks and then OER required discussion for us in our household. But of course, that's different from your parent that is just sending their kid and trusting they're getting the information that they need, plus all of the things you mentioned that are happening. So I think part of it is the education that we talked about, figuring out those constituencies for schools and addressing them accordingly. Any of our K-12 partners out there want to comment on that?
Is there any research? Oh, question in the comment. Is there any research to support OER in the elementary schools? Are districts using OER in elementary?
I'm not aware of any elementary that I've talked to as far as schools and superintendents. And honestly, there's not a ton out there at the moment for elementary. And you have the opportunity to develop it. I don't know that there's any definite research in that for OER. The general research tends to focus on overall cost impact for OER, that the quality remains the same of the content, but the cost is reduced for the student. So stepping into K-12 in OER really is kind of a brave new world for us.
And I think with that, I think there's a lot of concepts that are the same in OER that have probably been practiced for decades in elementary education or education, resource sharing, just between teachers in a building and such, that really OER kind of takes that to the next level and says, okay, we're going to, put these materials together and share within a wider community. And I think it is going to gain traction. And the next question talks about moving to remote learning and a lot of OER happening in new LMS systems. It's going to shift to the digital environment where we're going to expect more from textbook companies and from OER resources to be out there.
And I will tell you from a higher ed perspective, one of our drivers looking at this and using more digital, at least at our institution, and I imagine there's a similar correlation to the K-12 world, is that the way we have been using textbooks, working with our publishers, they are no longer allowing us to do that. So the systems that we had set in place to keep our costs reasonable for textbooks, because students weren't buying the textbook, they were renting the textbook, the publishers have changed the game on us. So now we can no longer pass through that savings to the students. So we're looking for ways to keep the costs low, minimal, or nothing for students if at all possible. But also when we work with concurrent partners, so delivering some of our information, our courses out into the high schools, we're looking for something that would work completely across the platform. So from the elementary perspective, this might be a great discussion to start having in your PLCs, your professional learning communities, about what this looks like. Is this something you want to dip your toe into? Who can help you with that?
I think Tara has a comment from.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think with regard to elementary classrooms and education, I think the nature of elementary education is so friendly to OER. Because I think those elementary teachers have been piecing materials together and creating their own lessons, maybe not from OER sources, but from traditional curriculum material. But again, that's really what OER is about. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was actually happening more often, or if, again, getting some groups of elementary teachers together, if it's a matter of just maybe finding some OER sources. Like I said, I just think the way that those lessons go together naturally in elementary education, it's what teachers do in OER, and so again, it might just be the sources might not be open. but I think the practice is very much in line with what we see teachers redesigning their lessons using OER resources. So that's my 2 cents. And my guess would be it's happening a lot more than anyone thinks.
And while let Sarah do that. While she's doing that, I'm going to go dig out into some databases and just see if there's any, because we know it's important to always have the data, but we also know that correlation does not equal causation, right? So I'm going to do a little bit of digging in the background to see if I can find something. And if I do, I'll post it in the chat for you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we'll have some more time for questions, but I want to show you some resources real quick that are available. You can get in there and look at them. But I also will say that there are a lot of advocates at the higher ed level at this point. So feel free to reach out to anybody on that committee, the subcommittee. And there's definitely people advocating for this, not just at the college level, but at the K-12 level. So the first one that I'm going to click out to is OpenStax, which is a pretty common one, but they do have a nice selection of high school material. And so you can see, I'm trying to remember what they have. I've gone into the science, which is strange. I'm not a science person, but I like their physics book. They have a high school version of the physics book. And so just so you get an idea of what some of these resources look like, there's a table of contents on the side. You can view it online. I'll go ahead and open up the table of contents so you can see what's in there. There's PDF and there's online print copy. With OpenStax material, you can actually order a hard copy of the textbook. However, it won't have, if you remix and create your own material within, it won't necessarily have that. There are instructor resources where you can see that there are, this one links to, it's a cartridge that goes into Canvas if that's your learning management system. But there's also instructor guides, lab manuals, Google Forms, and the instructor material on these are protected. You have to register and be, vetted as an instructor, so students can't just get on there to look for those answers. Not that they would do that. And then there's student resources. So there's generally a pretty good, OpenStax is pretty robust in getting everyone started in those materials. So it's a fairly easy platform to use. Then there's the OER Commons and Common Core alignment that will help. In this one, you can look, there's actually a thing up here that says hubs. And, oh, I'm not logged in. It's a free login. Let's see if I can remember my password. Of course I can't. Let me go back. I think I can look around here without. You can actually search by education level. And there are some primary, let me see, I haven't done a whole lot of search in the primary level. There's primary level books, and material, you can search by material types for assessment, activities, lesson plans. So those are out there. And there you can see the sources, you can see the Creative Commons license, and this one also tags to Common Core outcomes. So that's an easy place to get started. You can also find textbooks in OER Commons by education standards, by subject and education level. Let's see here. It's going to do math. So if you search for mathematics, and you can change the high school level, Sharon dropped some other resources into the chat just now. But this is a good place to get started if you're kind of want to dabble in like OER and what's out there and kind of see what's available. OER Commons is a great place to look. If you're into wanting to pull some materials together and remix and reuse them or create, LibreText is a platform that's good for that. You can look into different libraries. Let me see here. Ooh, come on. And you can, so I've gone on to the math, and then if I look into the bookshelves, you can basically see there's some pre-algebra, algebra, which these would be very much in line with maybe some high school curriculum. And you can actually create lessons and mix and use those from LibreText. And actually this afternoon, if you're interested in exploring LibreText more, there will be a creator session in this afternoon if you want to get an idea of how this platform works. It's pretty nice. You can pull in a lot of different books from different sources and maybe pull a chapter here and an activity from somewhere else to really custom create your sources. And then finally on this slide, we have found a really nice handbook that kind of goes over some of the basics of education, but what I like in here is that there's a large source of a large list of sources for OER and different places that you can find open education resources in here, which is very helpful if you're kind of just getting started in that world. Sharon, did you want to talk about anything, or do you want to open it back up for some questions for the last 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, I'll just drop in real quick as I was doing the side search for information on OER, what the research is supporting elementary and K-12. I'm just working through Google Scholar because that's the most accessible for anybody, but any of your other databases you could certainly look to. It seems like there is quite a bit of research on OER use in elementary ed, middle school, when you get out of the United States. There's a lot of references for Scotland, India, Europe, Africa. So it's very interesting to me that it seems like the rest of the world is maybe starting to move in this direction. So it gives us an opportunity, especially all of our colleagues on here, to kind of be, sometimes it's scary to be the first, right? To be the first one to step in and do things, but it's giving us the opportunity to maybe look at those options and then obviously compare education systems for those. But if you just do scholar.google.com, OER in elementary ed, and I'm always a fan of a teacher saying, hey kids, I have a new project for you. Everybody go out and look for OER in elementary ed. Let them pull some resources for you. I don't have anything else to add. If you guys have questions, please just
unmute and ask them, or you can type them in the chat and we'll finish up with a discussion here.
Can I make a comment, Sarah?
Sure.
I was going to refer back to what Tara was saying about the collegiality, the sharing of resources at almost the hallway level, I would say, amongst our colleagues. And remember, I'm middle and secondary school. I'm not elementary, though I have taken some elementary ed courses just because they were free of charge here on campus. And I'm here to tell you the math, the science, the science, the music courses, they were all really, really excellent. For me, Tara, one of the issues would be moving it from the hallway into the digital realm so that people other than those in the hallway would be able to access them. And that might be where trickling down from colleges of education, because what Sharon just said, here's a project for you, that might be the kind of thing where, I don't know, something like student teachers working with cooperating teachers, working with their professors on campus might be able to go ahead and collate, collect, compose these kinds of things, because it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to go ahead and write a guidebook about how to use these resources in a classroom. And I'd be very interested in seeing how they would affect brand new teachers, not just teachers who are experienced, so that teachers coming into our profession would then have that expectation of being able to access and create OER as a matter of course. Thank you for listening to me.
I think you're right. I think there's going to be a big push from the college students who are used to using OERs at the college level, and then coming out and going into the public education world or the K-12 education world. And then knowing like they're going to be kind of born in that generation where that's something that's just very common, and they will help to make that shift. Any other questions?
I would like to add, Sarah, too. I know as you're listening to this and we're talking about, be the first one, maybe there's options. We are very aware that the K-12 world is extremely different. The way you have to deliver information, you have to have curriculum approved, you have the constituency of your parents and all the other pieces that are falling in there. So please reach out and let us from that higher ed level help you start thinking through what some of the challenges are and try and skip you ahead a few years from things we've already experienced. Because ultimately, I think this is the true, right, that this is the Greek model. This is Socrates and Plato. This is everybody sharing information and putting it together in great resources that are flexible for our students in the way many of them are learning now.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to add that I love Suzanne's Zoom photo that she has up, because I keep thinking that it's her really on there, and then I keep being like, oh, it's a Zoom picture. Well done, Suzanne.
Suzanne says we need to get OER more accepted in higher ed. I think we're moving that way. There is support at the K board level and even some talk in legislature level, being interested in this. And I think honestly it's probably driven a lot by like seeing like actual money savings is what they're looking at. And because we know educational materials not getting any cheaper. So if there aren't any other questions, I would say if you think of something later on, please reach out. And to myself, to Sharon, to anybody really on the state OER subcommittee. Like I say, there's lots of advocacy there. And I'm sure a lot of people who would be willing to come and visit with you, your school districts, about what OER is, because a lot of it is educating parents, boards, everyone on what it is, to gain that acceptance for use in your districts.
And we know you're getting a lot of information, especially if you've been for the last 2 days, yesterday and today. And if you're like me, you take a lot of notes, you leave a conference, and maybe you don't revisit those notes. If you go to the K-Board website and just search OER or search Kansas Board of Regents OER, it will take you to the Board of Regents page on OER, and then you'll see some of the contact resources there and some other things you may find beneficial.
And Tara did put in the staff or in the chat that she can be contacted for curriculum members from KSDE if you have more questions. So, well, I think we're right at our time. So I'm going to let everyone take their break. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you in sessions later today, and glad to talk to you about OER.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Stay warm.